At our anniversary dinner, my husband stood next to his mistress, smirking as he slammed divorce papers on the table. "Finally, I'm done with you, sweetheart," he sneered. "I'm upgrading. Go find someone on your own level." Laughter burst around the table. I smiled, thanked everyone, and what I did next made their laughter freeze midair. My husband thought he was having his grand triumphant moment, leaving me for a younger woman in front of 40 guests at our anniversary party. What he didn't know, I'd been planning his downfall for months. Have you ever been so utterly betrayed that revenge felt like the only path to justice? Those exact words, "I am upgrading now, so go find someone from your own low level," actually came out of his mouth. Harrison said that right in front of 40 people at what was supposed to be our 5th wedding anniversary celebration. He stood there, practically preening, with a woman I'd never seen before clinging to his arm. He even held up divorce papers, placing them right in front of me like a restaurant menu, announcing to everyone that I was being replaced. And then, as if on cue, the room erupted in a chorus of cruel laughter. Not a few chuckles, but a full-blown roar, echoing off the expensive walls. His colleagues, his business associates, even strangers who'd been invited to witness my public humiliation, they all joined in. I just sat there in my emerald dress, my hands folded calmly in my lap, and I looked at the man I had spent 5 years supporting, building up, sacrificing for. Harrison thought this was his moment of victory, his grand declaration of freedom from a wife he had, apparently, outgrown. His public claim to a better future with someone younger and prettier standing beside him like a trophy he'd just won. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been expecting exactly this. Maybe not the specific, vicious words or the theatrical cruelty, but the performance itself? Oh, I knew it was coming. Because 3 months earlier, my entire world had shattered. I had discovered the truth about what Harrison had been doing behind my back. And I had spent every single day since then building something that would transform this moment from my destruction into his. The phone in my clutch purse was already connected to the venue's audiovisual system. The sharp-eyed attorney seated among the guests? She wasn't my yoga friend. And the mountain of evidence I had compiled over 90 relentless days was about to appear on every screen in that room. That cruel laughter that filled the expensive event space? It was about to die in a way none of them would ever forget. But to truly understand how I got to that moment, you need to know how our marriage, our story even began. 7 years ago, I met Harrison Whitmore at a marketing conference in Chicago. He was presenting on commercial property development strategies, standing at the front of a hotel ballroom in a navy suit that made him look so successful, so confident. The way he spoke about building a real estate empire made it sound inevitable, not just ambitious. He talked about the future like it was something he could construct with his bare hands. And honestly, I found that vision intoxicating. We went for coffee after his presentation, then dinner. By the end of that weekend, we had exchanged numbers and made plans to see each other again. Despite living in different cities, the long-distance phase lasted only 6 months before Harrison relocated for a property development opportunity that brought him right to my city. He said it was for work, but I like to believe I was part of that decision. When he proposed 2 years later at an upscale restaurant downtown, I said yes without a moment of hesitation. I truly believed we were building something together. That marriage meant partnership, mutual support, creating a life that reflected both our dreams and our contributions. And I threw myself into that partnership with everything I had. Harrison was launching his commercial real estate firm, and I became more than just his wife. I became his foundation. I introduced him to contacts from my marketing firm, people who trusted my judgment enough to take meetings based solely on my recommendation. Those introductions led to his first major property deal, the one that established his credibility in an industry where reputation determined everything. I managed our household so Harrison could focus entirely on his business. I took on all the invisible labor that kept our lives running smoothly. The grocery shopping and meal planning, the bills and mortgage payments, coordinating with repair people, managing our social calendar to maintain relationships crucial for his career. I hosted dinners for his business associates, transforming our suburban home into a space where deals could be discussed over wine and carefully prepared meals. I learned to read the room during those gatherings, understanding when to participate and when to fade into the background. I became skilled at making Harrison look good in front of people whose opinions affected his business prospects. I supported every late night he spent at the office, every risky investment that made our financial situation precarious, every decision that required one of us to sacrifice so the other could advance. I told myself this was what partnership looked like, that my contributions were building our future together. Even if Harrison's name was on the business cards and the property deals, our home became my project. I decorated it carefully, selecting furniture and art that created an impression of success and stability, the kind of home that said, Harrison Whitmore is someone worth doing business with, someone who has his life together, someone who can be trusted with major investments. I took pride in creating that environment, believing I was contributing to our shared success in ways that mattered, even if they weren't publicly acknowledged. Looking back from that moment at Meridian Hall, with divorce papers on the table in front of me, I could see how thoroughly I had deceived myself. I had been so focused on being supportive, on being the kind of wife who enabled her husband's ambitions, that I never questioned whether Harrison valued what I was building, whether he saw my contributions as partnership, or simply as the expected price of being married to someone with larger ambitions than mine. The shift in Harrison's behavior had started about 18 months before our 5th anniversary. So gradually, so subtly, that I convinced myself I was imagining problems where none existed. He started staying later at work, arriving home after midnight with vague explanations about investor meetings running long or property tours requiring his personal attention. When I asked about his day, hoping to maintain some connection to the business we were supposedly building, his answers became shorter, less detailed, like he was editing information, rather than sharing his life with me. His phone habits changed dramatically. The device that used to sit casually on our kitchen counter while he showered became permanently attached to his hand, always face down on every surface, always locked with a password I didn't know and honestly had never even thought to ask for. When notifications came through during dinner, he'd glance at the screen and smile in a way that suggested the messages were far more interesting than our conversation. Our relationship conversations shrank to pure logistics. Who would pick up groceries? When was the mortgage due? Did we need to schedule a plumber for the guest bathroom? The emotional intimacy that had characterized our early years together disappeared entirely, replaced by the kind of polite distance you maintain with a roommate you tolerate but don't particularly enjoy. Physical intimacy followed the same declining trajectory. What had once been frequent became occasional, then rare, then essentially non-existent. When I tried to initiate connection, Harrison cited exhaustion from work stress. He mentioned the demands of closing a major deal, how it required all his mental energy. He suggested we were simply going through a difficult phase that would improve once his current projects were completed. And I believed those explanations, because believing them was easier than confronting what they might actually mean. I told myself that successful marriages required weathering challenging seasons, that ambitious men sometimes became consumed by work in ways that temporarily diminished their capacity for emotional connection, that my role as a supportive partner meant giving Harrison the space he needed to focus on building the business that would eventually benefit us both. I made excuses to myself constantly. I made excuses to my sister, Emma, who started asking uncomfortable questions about why we never seemed happy anymore at family gatherings. I made excuses to our friends who noticed we no longer acted like a couple at social events, sitting on opposite sides of rooms, barely speaking unless someone directly engaged both of us. I was so determined to believe my marriage was fundamentally sound that I ignored every signal suggesting otherwise. Every late night that smelled like unfamiliar perfume. Every weekend work emergency that took Harrison away from home for entire days. Every unexplained charge on our credit card statements that I noticed, but convinced myself had reasonable explanations I simply hadn't thought of yet. Then the anniversary invitation arrived, 3 weeks before the party, delivered via email on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work. Not as a text message from Harrison, not through a conversation over breakfast about planning something special, but as a formal invite with professional design and calligraphy, announcing a lavish celebration at Meridian Hall, one of the most expensive event venues in our city. I stood in our bedroom, staring at my phone screen, feeling something cold settle deep in my stomach. Harrison hadn't voluntarily planned anything for us in 3 years. Our previous anniversary had passed with takeout Chinese food and a greeting card I had purchased for myself and signed his name to, because I couldn't bear marking 5 years of marriage with absolutely nothing. Yet, here was an invitation to an elaborate party I knew nothing about. 40 guests I hadn't helped select. A venue I hadn't been consulted about. An entire evening orchestrated without a single conversation with me, despite the fact that I was supposedly the person being honored. I scrolled through the guest list with growing unease. Harrison's business partners and colleagues dominated the names, people whose faces I could barely recall despite having met them at various work functions. My sister Emma was included, which provided small comfort. A handful of mutual friends who would probably feel as uncomfortable as I expected to feel watching whatever performance Harrison had planned. The realization hit me then, with absolute clarity. This wasn't about celebrating our marriage. This was about something else entirely, something that required an audience and formal planning, and a venue expensive enough to make an impression on the people Harrison wanted to witness whatever he was preparing to do. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I called Emma from my car in the office parking lot. She answered immediately, and I could hear the concern in her voice before I even finished explaining about the invitation. "Gemma," she said carefully, "when a man who hasn't planned anything in 3 years suddenly throws an expensive anniversary party without consulting his wife, that's not romance. That is something else. You need to be ready for whatever he's planning to do in front of all those people." Her words articulated the fear I had been trying to suppress. I wanted to defend Harrison, to insist she was wrong, to maintain the illusion that my marriage was simply going through a rough patch rather than actively falling apart. But I couldn't make myself believe the excuses anymore. 3 weeks later, I would be sitting at Meridian Hall in an emerald dress, watching my husband announce our divorce to 40 witnesses while standing beside his mistress. But in that moment, sitting in my car with Emma's warning still echoing in my mind, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to be a victim. I was going to be ready. That decision, to be ready rather than reactive, carried me through the rest of the week. I moved through our house like someone inhabiting a space that no longer belonged to her, touching furniture I had selected, looking at photographs documenting a marriage that now felt like fiction. Harrison came and went with his usual detachment, barely registering my presence beyond logistical exchanges about schedules and household maintenance. Saturday morning arrived, 3 weeks before the anniversary party. Harrison left at 6 a.m. for his routine at the downtown gym, the exclusive club he had joined 8 months earlier, claiming he needed to network with high-net-worth clients. I heard the front door close and his car pull out of the driveway while I was still in bed, pretending to sleep because our mornings had become exercises in avoidance rather than connection. I got up 30 minutes later and went downstairs to make coffee. My weekend ritual involved grinding beans fresh and using the French press Harrison had given me 3 years ago for my birthday, back when he still paid attention to things I liked. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of water heating and beans grinding, familiar domestic sounds that felt strange now that I understood how thoroughly the foundation beneath them had cracked. His laptop was sitting open on the counter. My breath hitched, Harrison never left his laptop open anymore. Everything had become password protected and private over the past 18 months. His devices treated like classified documents. Yet there it sat, screen glowing faintly in the morning light coming through our kitchen windows. I was pouring hot water over the coffee grounds when the notification appeared. A small pop-up in the corner of the screen that I could see clearly from where I stood. My hand stilled on the French press handle as I read the words that made time stop. Weekend away with Elle, Napa Valley Resort. Confirm reservation. The dates displayed were for next month, Thursday through Sunday. For days at the romantic Vineyard Resort I had been suggesting we visit for 2 years. The place I had bookmarked on my computer and mentioned repeatedly, trying to find something that might restore what had been lost between us. Not with me, though. With someone who warranted a single initial rather than a full name, suggesting either careful discretion or the kind of casual intimacy where full names became unnecessary between people who knew each other well. I sat down the French press with deliberate care, my coffee forgotten, as I walked the 3 steps to where his laptop sat open and unguarded. The shower upstairs was still running. Harrison would be occupied for at least another 10 minutes, possibly 15 if he followed his usual routine. I should have closed the laptop, respected his privacy, walked away and convinced myself there was an innocent explanation for what I had seen. But my hands were already moving, already clicking on the notification to open the calendar application fully. The screen filled with entries I had never seen before. Weeks and months of scheduled appointments that told a story I had been refusing to acknowledge even as I lived inside it. Lunch with Elle appeared every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. Always during hours Harrison claimed to be meeting with investors or touring properties in neighborhoods too far away for me to casually visit. The entries stretched back through weeks of calendar history, a pattern so consistent it was clearly routine, not occasional. Evening at Elle's place populated most Thursday nights. The same evenings Harrison told me he was attending networking events with other real estate professionals, coming home after midnight smelling like wine and cigarettes, explaining he'd stayed late to make the right connections. I scrolled further back, watching months of my marriage rewrite themselves as I discovered the truth beneath the explanations I had accepted. The Napa Resort reservation wasn't an isolated romantic gesture. It was part of a pattern stretching back 14 months. 14 months of systematic deception while I had been maintaining our home and planning our anniversary, and wondering why I felt so desperately alone in a marriage that was supposed to eliminate loneliness. The earlier entries were more explicit, created before Harrison had apparently learned to use initials for discretion. Dinner with Leah at Harborview. Meet Leah at the Grandmont Hotel. Pick up gift for Leah. Leah, not an initial anymore, but an actual name. A real person who had occupied 14 months of my husband's life while I was being the supportive wife who made sure his shirts were pressed and his mother received birthday cards on time. The shower upstairs turned off. I had maybe 5 minutes before Harrison came downstairs, expecting breakfast and the same oblivious wife he had been deceiving for over a year. I opened his email application, my hands moving faster now as adrenaline overrode the shock. The inbox loaded immediately because Harrison hadn't bothered to. Log out, confident in his privacy, or perhaps just careless in his comfort with deception. The emails from Leah were easy to find. They dominated his recent messages, dozens of them exchanged just in the past week. I clicked on the most recent thread and started reading. The messages were worse than the calendar entries because they contained actual words, emotions expressed in complete sentences, a relationship that existed in detailed exchanges rather than just scheduled appointments. Leah Vaughn was 28 years old, according to her email signature, a marketing director at Grand View Hotels, a luxury chain Harrison's company had partnered with for some mixed-use development project downtown. Her professional title sat beneath her name in clean sans serif font, creating cognitive dissonance between her corporate role and the intimate content of her messages to my husband. Cannot wait for Napa, baby. Finally, a whole weekend without hiding. I am so tired of pretending we are just colleagues when we are together at work events. I want to be able to touch you without worrying who is watching. Harrison's response had come within minutes. I know, sunshine. Just a few more weeks after the anniversary thing is handled. Everything changes. No more hiding. No more pretending. Just us, building the life we have been planning. The anniversary thing. He was referring to our marriage, our 5 years together, as a thing to be handled before moving on to his real life with someone else. I scrolled through more messages, each one revealing layers of a relationship that had clearly moved far beyond physical affair into emotional partnership. They had inside jokes, shared references to experiences I knew nothing about, plans for a future that included Harrison, but somehow excluded his wife entirely. Harrison called her sunshine, the best part of his day, his reason for getting up in the morning. Phrases I dimly remembered him using with me during our courtship, before they became casualties of familiarity and the comfortable routine of established marriage. But the truly devastating discovery was not emotional. It was financial. Buried in their email exchanges was a shared folder Harrison had given Leah access to, labeled Our Future, with the kind of optimistic certainty that made my stomach turn. I clicked on it and watched spreadsheet after spreadsheet load on screen. Assets Harrison was moving. Bank statements showing systematic transfers from our joint accounts into new ones bearing only his name. Investment accounts I had helped fund through my salary and the business contacts I had provided, now being liquidated and converted into holdings I had no access to and apparently no knowledge of until this very moment. He had been stealing from me, methodically, deliberately for months. I found statements for accounts I didn't know existed, transfers of substantial amounts that should have required both our signatures, but apparently had not. Documentation showing Harrison had been using our home equity as collateral for business loans without my knowledge or consent, putting our house at risk for investments that would benefit only him if the marriage ended. There was even a draft prenuptial agreement buried in one of the subfolders. I opened it and read through terms so one-sided they would have been comical if they hadn't represented the systematic theft of everything I had helped build during 5 years of marriage. Harrison would keep the business, the investment accounts, the retirement funds, most of the property we had accumulated together. I would receive a small settlement that might cover 6 months of basic living expenses if I was careful with spending. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to leave me with nothing, while he started a new life with someone younger and more exciting, someone worthy of the successful version of himself he wanted to present to the world. I heard movement upstairs, footsteps crossing the bedroom floor toward the stairs. Harrison would be down in less than 2 minutes, expecting his Saturday morning routine to proceed exactly as it always did. My first instinct was confrontation, to scream, to throw his laptop across the kitchen and watch it shatter against the wall, to demand explanations and apologies and some acknowledgement of what he had been doing to destroy us. But something stopped me. Some survival instinct that recognized anger without strategy was just noise. That confrontation without preparation would give Harrison time to hide more assets, delete more evidence, construct more lies that I would have no way to disprove. I pulled out my phone instead, started photographing everything on his screen with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. Every calendar entry, every email exchange, every financial document showing the systematic transfer of our shared assets into accounts bearing only his name. My hands moved with mechanical efficiency, while my mind processed the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my marriage. I created a secure cloud storage account under a pseudonym, using my work email and a password Harrison would never guess. Uploaded every photograph while listening to him move around upstairs, getting dressed. Then I closed his laptop exactly as I had found it, notifications still visible on the screen. and returned to making coffee, like the previous 10 minutes had not just dismantled my entire understanding of my life. Harrison came downstairs 5 minutes later, hair damp from the shower, gym clothes bundled in his arms. He was humming something under his breath, looking relaxed and satisfied in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Good workout?" I asked, my voice remarkably normal considering what I had just discovered. "Great," he said, leaning in to kiss my forehead with the same casual affection you might show a moderately appreciated household pet. "Sorry I'm running late, though. Can you wrap those eggs to go?" I wrapped his breakfast in foil and handed it to him along with a travel mug of coffee I had poured while he collected his things. Watched him grab his laptop without noticing anything amiss. Waved as he headed out for another Saturday at the office that probably involved Leia rather than actual work. The door closed behind him. His car started in the driveway. I stood alone in our kitchen with cold coffee and the weight of knowledge I could not unknow. Then I sat down at our kitchen table, opened my own laptop, and began researching divorce attorneys who specialized in financial fraud within marriages. The search for divorce attorneys who specialized in financial fraud took me down a rabbit hole of legal websites and consultation forms that all blended together after the first dozen. I needed someone who understood that this was not just about ending a marriage, but about recovering assets that had been systematically stolen and preventing Harrison from controlling the narrative of our separation. Catherine Ross's name appeared repeatedly in online reviews and legal forums discussing complex divorce cases involving hidden assets. Her website was professional but not flashy, featuring testimonials that read like victory reports from women who had been in situations similar to mine. One review in particular caught my attention. Catherine recovered money my ex-husband swore no longer existed and made him pay for trying to hide it. I called her office Monday morning from my car, parked in a grocery store lot 3 blocks from my workplace, because I couldn't risk anyone from my office overhearing this conversation. The receptionist who answered had the kind of efficient professionalism that suggested she fielded calls from desperate women regularly and knew how to assess urgency. "I need a consultation about divorce involving financial fraud," I said, keeping my voice steady despite how strange the words felt coming out of my mouth. "How soon can you come in?" she asked without hesitation. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow afternoon at 2. Bring any documentation you have. Bank statements, emails, photographs, anything that supports what you're telling me." Tuesday afternoon found me walking into a steel and glass building downtown that screamed expensive legal expertise, from the marble lobby to the elevator panels. Catherine's office occupied the 14th floor, and when I stepped off the elevator into a reception area decorated in calming neutrals, I felt simultaneously out of place and exactly where I needed to be. Catherine Ross was in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her handshake was firm, her office organized to the point of intimidating. And when she gestured for me to sit in her conference room, I noticed she had already pulled up a notepad and a recording device. "Tell me everything," she said simply. I showed her the screenshots on my phone, walked her through the calendar entries and emails, explained the financial documents I had discovered showing systematic asset transfers. By the time I finished, 40 minutes had passed, and Catherine had filled several pages with notes and handwriting so precise it looked typed. "Your husband," she said, looking up from her notepad with an expression that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and predatory, "is both dishonest and sloppy. That combination will be his downfall." She asked questions for another 30 minutes, drilling into details about our financial situation, the timeline of when things changed, whether I had noticed any other suspicious behavior. Then she leaned back in her chair and outlined what would happen next. Over the following 2 weeks, Catherine assembled a team that operated with military precision. A forensic accountant named Marcus began tracing Harrison's financial movements, uncovering layers of hidden accounts. He even discovered that Harrison had been using our home equity as collateral for business loans without my knowledge or signature. A private investigator started documenting Harrison and Leia's movements across the city. A paralegal named Sophie organized everything into case files that grew thicker each time I visited Catherine's office. The team worked relentlessly. Marcus found Harrison's business partner's name on a storage unit containing the vintage watch collection Harrison had claimed he sold 3 years ago when business was supposedly tight. The collection was worth at least $40,000, sitting in climate-controlled storage, while Harrison told me we needed to be careful about spending. The credit card analysis revealed charges at luxury hotels that appeared on our joint account. I had been helping finance Harrison's romantic getaways without even knowing they existed. Marcus documented dinners at expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases from boutiques I had never visited, even spa treatments that clearly hadn't been for my benefit. The private investigator captured video footage of Harrison and Leia meeting for lunch at places where any business associate might see them, holding hands across tables and laughing with the easy intimacy of an established couple. The surveillance showed them entering hotels in the middle of the afternoon, emerging hours later with body language that left little doubt about what had occurred inside. 3 weeks into building our case, Catherine called me back into her office for what she described as a strategic planning session. She had been reviewing Harrison's patterns and had noticed something significant about the timing and nature of the anniversary party. "He is planning something public," Catherine said, her expression serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. The expensive venue, the guest list heavy with business associates, the formal invitations. "This is not about celebrating your marriage. This is theater." She explained that men like Harrison didn't just want to leave their wives. They wanted to be seen leaving, to be witnessed making what they considered an upgrade, to have their decision validated by people whose opinions mattered to their professional and social standing. "The anniversary party is not a celebration," Catherine continued. "It is a stage. He is going to do something there, and we need to be ready with a response that is equally public and far more devastating." Her assessment made terrible sense. It explained why Harrison had suddenly taken the initiative to plan an elaborate event when he hadn't voluntarily organized anything for us in years. This wasn't about honoring our marriage. This was about positioning himself as the successful man, finally free from the burden of a wife he had outgrown. Catherine drafted legal documents that could be filed immediately when the time came. She prepared evidence packages, organized by category: financial fraud, marital asset dissipation, documentation of infidelity with dates and locations. She coordinated with Marcus and the private investigator to ensure we had comprehensive documentation of everything Harrison had done, leaving no room for him to claim I was exaggerating or lying about his behavior. "When he makes his move," Catherine said during one of our planning sessions, "we respond immediately, publicly, and with evidence he cannot dispute. He wants theater? We will give him theater. But our version ends very differently than the script he has written." The hardest part of those 3 weeks was not the meetings with lawyers or reviewing evidence that documented my husband's betrayal. It was going home every evening and pretending I knew nothing, maintaining the facade of the oblivious wife while living with someone who was systematically destroying everything we had supposedly built together. Every morning, I made coffee and asked about Harrison's day with genuine-sounding interest. Every evening, I prepared dinners he barely touched while scrolling through his phone, probably texting Leia about plans that didn't include me. I did laundry and paid bills and maintained our household exactly as I always had. I attended work functions where Harrison worked with colleagues, standing beside him and smiling while making small talk with people who had no idea what was happening beneath the surface of our apparently stable marriage. At these events, Leia was sometimes present. I watched them maintain careful professional distance, while their eyes communicated everything their words could not say in public. 2 weeks before the anniversary party, Harrison's firm hosted a charity gala benefiting some cause I could no longer remember. The event was at I felt simultaneously out of place and exactly where I needed to be. Catherine Ross was in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her handshake was firm, her office organized to the point of intimidating. And when she gestured for me to sit in her conference room, I noticed she had already pulled up a notepad and a recording device. "Tell me everything," she said simply. I showed her the screenshots on my phone, walked her through the calendar entries and emails, explained the financial documents I had discovered showing systematic asset transfers. By the time I finished, 40 minutes had passed, and Catherine had filled several pages with notes and handwriting so precise it looked typed. "Your husband," she said, looking up from her notepad with an expression that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and predatory, "is both dishonest and sloppy. That combination will be his downfall." She asked questions for another 30 minutes, drilling into details about our financial situation, the timeline of when things changed, whether I had noticed any other suspicious behavior. Then she leaned back in her chair and outlined what would happen next. Over the following 2 weeks, Catherine assembled a team that operated with military precision. A forensic accountant named Marcus began tracing Harrison's financial movements, uncovering layers of hidden accounts. He even discovered that Harrison had been using our home equity as collateral for business loans without my knowledge or signature. A private investigator started documenting Harrison and Leia's movements across the city. A paralegal named Sophie organized everything into case files that grew thicker each time I visited Catherine's office. The team worked relentlessly. Marcus found Harrison's business partner's name on a storage unit containing the vintage watch collection Harrison had claimed he sold 3 years ago when business was supposedly tight. The collection was worth at least $40,000, sitting in climate-controlled storage, while Harrison told me we needed to be careful about spending. The credit card analysis revealed charges at luxury hotels that appeared on our joint account. I had been helping finance Harrison's romantic getaways without even knowing they existed. Marcus documented dinners at expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases from boutiques I had never visited, even spa treatments that clearly hadn't been for my benefit. The private investigator captured video footage of Harrison and Leia meeting for lunch at places where any business associate might see them, holding hands across tables and laughing with the easy intimacy of an established couple. The surveillance showed them entering hotels in the middle of the afternoon, emerging hours later with body language that left little doubt about what had occurred inside. 3 weeks into building our case, Catherine called me back into her office for what she described as a strategic planning session. She had been reviewing Harrison's patterns and had noticed something significant about the timing and nature of the anniversary party. "He is planning something public," Catherine said, her expression serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. "The expensive venue, the guest list heavy with business associates, the formal invitations. This is not about celebrating your marriage. This is theater." She explained that men like Harrison didn't just want to leave their wives. They wanted to be seen leaving, to be witnessed making what they considered an upgrade, to have their decision validated by people whose opinions mattered to their professional and social standing. "The anniversary party is not a celebration," Catherine continued. "It is a stage. He is going to do something there, and we need to be ready with a response that is equally public and far more devastating." Her assessment made terrible sense. It explained why Harrison had suddenly taken the initiative to plan an elaborate event when he hadn't voluntarily organized anything for us in years. This wasn't about honoring our marriage. This was about positioning himself as the successful man, finally free from the burden of a wife he had outgrown. Catherine drafted legal documents that could be filed immediately when the time came. She prepared evidence packages, organized by category: financial fraud, marital asset dissipation, documentation of infidelity with dates and locations. She coordinated with Marcus and the private investigator to ensure we had comprehensive documentation of everything Harrison had done, leaving no room for him to claim I was exaggerating or lying about his behavior. "When he makes his move," Catherine said during one of our planning sessions, "we respond immediately, publicly and with evidence he cannot dispute. He wants theater? We will give him theater. But our version ends very differently than the script he has written. The hardest part of those 3 weeks was not the meetings with lawyers or reviewing evidence that documented my husband's betrayal. It was going home every evening and pretending I knew nothing, maintaining the facade of the oblivious wife while living with someone who was systematically destroying everything we had supposedly built together. Every morning, I made coffee and asked about Harrison's day with genuine-sounding interest. Every evening, I prepared dinners he barely touched while scrolling through his phone, probably texting Leah about plans that didn't include me. I did laundry and paid bills and maintained our household exactly as I always had. I attended work functions where Harrison worked with colleagues, standing beside him and smiling while making small talk with people who had no idea what was happening beneath the surface of our apparently stable marriage. At these events, Leah was sometimes present. I watched them maintain careful professional distance, while their eyes communicated everything their words could not say in public. 2 weeks before the anniversary party, Harrison's firm hosted a charity gala benefiting some cause I could no longer remember. The event was at a Thursday afternoon. Catherine called an emergency meeting. Her voice on the phone carried an urgency that made my pulse quicken even before she explained why. "Marcus found something significant," she said. "Can you be at my office in an hour?" I left work early, claiming a dental emergency, and drove downtown with my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Catherine's conference room felt smaller than usual when I walked in. Or maybe it was just the weight of whatever information was about to be shared. Marcus was there along with Catherine's associate who specialized in tax law. They had documents spread across the table in organized stacks that suggested hours of analysis. Harrison's business partner has been keeping documentation of questionable financial practices, Marcus explained without preamble. Joel Preston. He has been uncomfortable for months with how Harrison handles property valuations and loan applications. Catherine picked up the explanation. Harrison has been inflating property appraisals to secure larger loans than the properties are actually worth. He takes out the loan based on the false valuation, uses some of it for legitimate business purposes, and pockets the difference. It is systematic fraud that extends beyond your marriage into his professional operations. The tax attorney, a woman named Rebecca Chin, added more context. Based on what Joel has documented and what Marcus has uncovered, Harrison has also been underreporting income from property sales. The difference between what he reports to the IRS and what he actually receives is significant enough to trigger a federal investigation if the right people become aware of it. I sat down slowly, processing the scope of what they were telling me. "So, this isn't just about divorce anymore." "No," Catherine said. "This is about documenting a pattern of fraudulent behavior that extends into multiple areas of his life. When you expose what he has done to you personally, we will also be exposing practices that could result in criminal charges. Joel is willing to provide testimony if necessary, but he wants legal protection for himself since he was technically aware of some of these practices, even if he didn't participate in them." "Can you arrange that?" I asked. "Already in process," Catherine replied. "Rebecca has contacts at the IRS who will be very interested in this information. We have drafted a formal complaint with enough detail to trigger an investigation, but we are holding off on filing it until after Sunday." "Why wait?" "Because timing matters," Catherine explained. "If we file before the party, Harrison might get wind of it and change his plans. We need him to proceed with whatever he has orchestrated for Sunday evening. We need him confident and exposed. Then we hit him with everything at once: the personal betrayal, the financial fraud within your marriage, and the professional misconduct that threatens his entire business." The scope of what we were building felt overwhelming. This had started as documentation of an affair and asset concealment. Now, it encompassed potential federal crimes and the destruction of everything Harrison had built professionally. "You need to leave no room for doubt," Catherine said, reading my expression accurately. No space for him to claim you are a vindictive ex-wife, exaggerating the truth. When you reveal what he has done, it needs to be so thoroughly documented that nobody, not his colleagues, not his business partners, not even his lawyers, can question the evidence. Friday afternoon, I picked up the emerald dress I had ordered 2 weeks earlier from a boutique downtown. The silk was beautiful, the cut flattering in a way that made me feel powerful rather than decorative. Emma had come with me for moral support, and we were heading back to my car when my phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. "We're something nice tomorrow. I want you to look good for our guests." I showed the message to Emma, who actually threw her own phone across the interior of my car in frustration. "He is unbelievable. He is going to publicly divorce you, and he wants you to dress up for it." "That is exactly what I need," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "His arrogance is what makes this work. He is so confident I will comply with his expectations even as he destroys our marriage that he cannot imagine I might have plans of my own." Emma retrieved her phone from where it had landed near the passenger side floor mat. "You are terrifying when you are strategic. Remind me never to cross you." That evening, Harrison worked late again, or claimed to. I sat alone in our living room with a glass of wine, going through the evidence one more time on my laptop. Photographs of Harrison and Leah at restaurants. Video footage of them entering hotels. Financial documents showing systematic theft. Email exchanges revealing a relationship that had lasted 14 months, while I was supporting his career and maintaining our household. My phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. The message was short and devastating in its casual confidence. "Tomorrow is going to be perfect. Finally, I can stop hiding. Love." Oh, the text was clearly meant for Harrison. Leah had somehow got my number confused with his in her contacts. An easy mistake when two people's names were stored sequentially in a phone. She was excited about tomorrow, about whatever public declaration Harrison had planned, about finally stepping into the role she had been playing in secret for over a year. I forwarded the screenshot to Catherine without adding any comment. Her response came within minutes. "Perfect. Keep that. We can use it." Saturday evening arrived with the quality of a Last Supper. Harrison came home early again, poured bourbon for both of us without being asked, and actually sat with me in our living room instead of disappearing into his office. "I've been thinking about us," he said after several minutes of silence. I waited, letting him fill the quiet with whatever carefully constructed statement he had prepared. "Tomorrow is going to mark a new chapter. Things have been difficult, I know, but change can be good. Change can be exactly what people need to move forward." His words were deliberately vague, constructed to mean anything depending on interpretation. I played along because that was what the moment required. "Change can be good," I agreed. "Tomorrow will certainly be memorable." We sat there for another hour, having the most extended conversation we had shared in months. Every word he spoke was theater. Every response I gave was performance. Two people speaking different languages while pretending perfect understanding. Harrison went to bed before me, claiming he needed to be well rested for tomorrow. I sat alone in our living room, finishing my bourbon and thinking about how tomorrow night would be the last time he slept in this house as my husband. Possibly the last time he would be a free man before everything I had built came crashing down on him with the weight of thoroughly documented truth. I felt surprisingly calm, almost peaceful, like someone who had been climbing a mountain for 3 months and could finally see the summit. Tomorrow I would reach it. Sunday arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke before dawn and lay in bed, listening to Harrison sleep beside me, his breathing steady and undisturbed by whatever conscience might have troubled a different kind of person. The irony was not lost on me that this would be the last morning we would wake up in the same house as husband and wife. I spent the day in careful preparation. The emerald silk dress hung in my closet, pressed and ready. My hair appointment was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon, giving me enough time to achieve the polished look I needed without appearing to have tried too hard. Every detail mattered. Every element of my appearance needed to communicate that I was someone who deserved respect, not someone who could be casually discarded in front of an audience. Harrison spent most of the day at his office, claiming last-minute preparations for the evening, though I suspected he was with Leia, coordinating whatever performance they had planned. He came home at 4 o'clock to shower and change, passing me in the hallway with barely a word beyond confirming that he would meet me at the venue, since he needed to arrive early to ensure everything was arranged properly. I was grateful for the solitude. It gave me time to center myself, to run through the plan one final time with Catherine over the phone, to prepare mentally for what was coming. At 6:30, I stood outside Meridian Hall alone. Emma had offered to arrive with me, to provide moral support during those final moments before walking into whatever Harrison had orchestrated, but I had declined. I needed this moment to myself, needed to walk through those doors on my own terms, carrying the weight of what I knew and what I was about to do. The building was stunning in the evening light. Glass and steel rising above the harbor, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting sunset colors across the water in shades of amber and rose gold. The kind of venue that screamed expensive taste and careful planning. Harrison had spared no expense, which was ironic, considering the expense came from accounts that legally belonged to both of us. I checked my phone one final time. Catherine had texted an hour ago, confirming she was already inside, positioned among the guests as my supposed friend from yoga class. Marcus was parked nearby in case we needed additional documentation beyond what Emma would capture. Everything was in place. Every piece of the counter-strategy we had built over 3 months was ready to deploy. I took a deep breath that did nothing to settle the adrenaline coursing through my system, smoothed the emerald silk of my dress, checked my reflection in the building's glass exterior, and saw a woman who looked far more composed than she felt. Then I walked through the entrance, with my head high and my expression carefully neutral. Every inch the devoted wife, arriving to celebrate her anniversary, completely unaware that her marriage was about to end in front of 40 witnesses. The first thing I noticed was Leia. She stood beside Harrison, near the entrance to the main event space, greeting guests as they arrived, like this was her party, her celebration, her right to play hostess at an event supposedly honoring my marriage. The audacity was breathtaking. She wore red, a dress that probably cost what I earned in 2 months. The kind of designer piece that communicated wealth and taste in equal measure. Her hair was styled in loose waves that looked effortlessly romantic, but had probably required hours with a professional stylist. Her makeup was flawless, camera-ready, perfect for whatever photographic documentation Harrison expected this evening to generate. She looked like success, like youth, like everything I apparently was not in Harrison's estimation of what he deserved. Harrison saw me before I reached them. His expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession, too quickly for me to identify each one individually. Surprise, maybe? Or guilt? Or possibly just the discomfort of seeing someone you are about to publicly destroy looking unexpectedly composed and beautiful. "Gemma," he said, my name sounding foreign in his mouth after months of casual disregard. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied with perfect politeness. "The venue is stunning. You did an excellent job with the planning." I turned to Leia and extended my hand with the same gracious courtesy I would show any hostess at an event. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Gemma." She took my hand with a smile that contained sympathy, actual pity, for the woman she had been betraying for 14 months. "Leia Vaughn, it's lovely to finally meet you properly." Finally, as though we had been circling each other for years, rather than existing in the same spaces while she conducted an affair with my husband. "Lovely to meet you as well," I said, releasing her hand and moving past them into the event space before either could read anything in my expression beyond polite friendliness. The room was filling rapidly with guests. Harrison's business associates dominated the crowd. Men and women I recognized from various work functions over the years. Several mutual friends had arrived, people who would soon need to choose sides in whatever aftermath followed tonight. My sister Emma was already positioned near the head table, her phone resting casually beside her water glass in a way that looked natural but was carefully calculated. Catherine stood near the bar talking to someone I didn't recognize, playing her role as my yoga friend perfectly. She caught my eye briefly and gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement before returning to her conversation. Everything was in place. Everyone was positioned exactly where they needed to be. Dinner began at 7 o'clock. We were seated at a long table positioned in the center of the room for maximum visibility. 40 guests arranged in carefully planned seating that separated me from Harrison by the entire table's length. I sat at one end, like a guest at my own anniversary celebration, while Harrison held court at the other end with Leia beside him. Her hand touched his arm repeatedly throughout the meal. Small gestures of proprietary familiarity that made several guests visibly uncomfortable. People noticed. People always notice when something is inappropriate, even if they choose not to acknowledge it directly. The food was expensive and beautifully presented. 5 courses of tiny portions arranged on plates like edible art. I couldn't taste any of it. My entire focus was on Harrison, on waiting for whatever performance was coming, on preparing myself to execute the response Catherine and I had planned. Conversations around me were superficial, business talk and observations about the view and compliments on the floral arrangements. I participated with polite engagement that looked like normalcy, while my mind ran through every step of what was about to happen. Between the 4th and 5th courses, I noticed Emma pull out her phone and position it on the table with the screen facing toward Harrison's end of the room. Recording mode activated, though the angle looked casual enough that no one would question it. Catherine did the same from her position several seats down, both phones capturing different angles of whatever was about to unfold. Then Harrison stood. The room went quiet immediately with the kind of attention successful men command without effort. "Thank you all for celebrating this special evening with us," he began, his voice carrying across the space with practiced confidence. Every word was precisely delivered, clearly rehearsed. 5 years ago, I made a commitment. Tonight, I want to acknowledge that commitment and where it has brought me. I watched his face, saw the satisfaction there, the confidence of someone who believed he was finally taking control of his life, freeing himself from a burden he had outgrown. "Marriage teaches you what you really want," he continued, looking directly at me across the length of the table. "What you actually need, what you are willing to settle for versus what you deserve." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. The atmosphere in the room was changing. People were beginning to sense this was not a typical anniversary toast. Gemma has been exactly what I expected when we married. Supportive, reliable, present. He made those qualities sound like criticism, like failures disguised as compliments, like I had somehow disappointed him by being exactly what a partner should be. But I have grown beyond what I was 5 years ago. My business has expanded. My vision has evolved. And I have found someone who matches where I am now, not where I was then. Leia was looking at him with undisguised adoration. The room had gone completely silent except for soft classical music playing from hidden speakers, an utterly inappropriate soundtrack for the destruction unfolding. Harrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. He walked the entire length of the table with theatrical precision and placed it directly in front of me. "Divorce papers," he announced with a satisfaction that made several guests audibly gasp. "Already filed, already processed. I'm done with you, sweetheart. Finally. Completely done. I am upgrading now. So, go find someone from your own low level." Leia laughed first, a bright, tinkling sound that seemed to give permission for others to join. Several of Harrison's business associates did. Nervous laughter filling the space where shock had been. Emma looked ready to physically attack my husband. Catherine had gone absolutely still, her expression focused with laser intensity. I looked at the envelope, at Harrison's face, glowing with triumph, at Leia standing beside him like a prize he had just won. Then I smiled. I smiled. Not a sad smile or a broken smile, but something genuine that came from a place of calm certainty I hadn't accessed in months. The laughter in the room faltered slightly. Harrison's expression flickered with confusion, because this was not the script he had written. I was supposed to cry, to beg, to make a scene that validated his decision and made him look like the reasonable party finally escaping an inadequate wife. I picked up the manila envelope, slowly, deliberately, opened it with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be given the adrenaline coursing through my system. The divorce papers inside were exactly as expected, already processed and filed as Harrison had announced. Everything designed to make this moment irreversible and public. I read through the first page with the kind of careful attention you might give a restaurant menu. Then I looked up at Harrison with an expression I had been practicing for weeks in front of my bathroom mirror. "Thank you," I said quietly. But in the silence that had fallen over the room, my voice carried perfectly to every corner. "Truly, thank you for this gift." Harrison's confidence wavered visibly. This was not the response he had anticipated. Several guests exchanged confused glances, uncertain about what was happening or how they were supposed to react. I stood, smoothed the emerald silk of my dress with deliberate care, and reached into my clutch purse. My phone emerged, held in a way that made several guests lean forward with curiosity about what I might do next. "Since we are sharing important documents tonight," I said, my voice steady and carrying across the room with unexpected authority, "I have something too, a little anniversary surprise of my own." I had arranged access to the venue's audiovisual system that afternoon, claiming I wanted to prepare a sentimental photo montage as a surprise for Harrison. The staff had been helpful, even showing me how to connect wirelessly to the large screens positioned around the room. My phone connected on the first attempt. The screens flickered to life. What appeared was not a sentimental photo montage celebrating marital happiness. It was Catherine's carefully edited video compilation, opening with simple text on a black screen, what Harrison did while Gemma planned their anniversary. The soundtrack was dramatic and cold, something classical that made the entire production feel like a documentary rather than personal revenge. I had left the music selection to Catherine, who had chosen perfectly. Then came the photographs Marcus had captured over 3 weeks of surveillance. Harrison and Leia entering hotel rooms in the middle of the afternoon. Timestamps were visible in the corner, showing dates and times that corresponded exactly with hours Harrison had told me he was touring properties or meeting with investors. Harrison and Leia having lunch at expensive restaurants, his hand on hers across white tablecloths, their body language unmistakably intimate in ways that transcended professional interaction. Harrison and Leia at his exclusive gym working out side by side. Video footage showed them leaving together, getting into her car, driving to her apartment building. Text message screenshots appeared next. Conversations where Leia called him my future, and Harrison responded with promises about their life together, once he handled the Gemma situation. The footage was damning, not just because it proved infidelity. It showed a relationship conducted in public places where anyone might have seen them. It suggested either remarkable arrogance or complete confidence that I would never discover the truth. The room was absolutely silent except for the music and the sound of my video playing across multiple screens. Every guest was forced to watch from whatever angle was closest to them. There was no escaping it. Harrison's face had gone from triumph to shock to something approaching horror. He was watching his private relationship exposed in front of everyone he had invited to witness my humiliation. The irony was not lost on me, and I suspected it would not be lost on him either once the initial shock wore off. Leia had gone pale, one hand pressed to her mouth as though she might be sick. But the photographic evidence was only the opening act. The video transitioned smoothly to financial documents. Bank statements showing Harrison's systematic transfer of assets from our joint accounts to ones bearing only his name. Spreadsheets detailing the liquidation of investments I had helped fund through my salary and business connections. Credit card charges for hotels and romantic dinners and jewelry, all charged to our shared accounts. The screens displayed documentation of the storage unit containing his vintage watch collection he had claimed was sold years ago when business was tight. The hidden accounts he had opened, using our home equity as collateral without my knowledge. The draft post-nuptial agreement, so one-sided it demonstrated either legal incompetence or complete contempt for my contributions to our marriage. Several of Harrison's business associates were leaning forward now, reading the financial documents with the attention of people who understood exactly what they were seeing and recognized the legal implications. Then came the final piece, the evidence Catherine had saved for maximum impact. A letter from the Internal Revenue Service, official letterhead, proper seals, signatures from actual federal officials Catherine had contacted through her network of legal connections. The letter outlined an investigation into Harrison's company for tax fraud related to unreported income from property sales. Income he had concealed not just from me, but from federal authorities. The document detailed potential charges that could result in significant fines and possible criminal prosecution. 40 guests sat in absolute silence, watching a successful man's reputation disintegrate in real time across multiple screens. Watching private financial crimes become public record. Watching what they had thought was a simple divorce announcement transform into evidence of systematic betrayal and fraud that extended far beyond marital misconduct. When the screens finally went dark, the silence was total, broken only by the sound of someone crying. Leah. I realized her mascara was running in dark streams that destroyed her carefully constructed appearance. Her face had crumpled as she understood that her career and reputation had just been demolished along with Harrison's. I walked the length of the table slowly, deliberately, holding a second set of papers I had been carrying in my purse all evening. Harrison stood frozen, unable to speak or move. His face had gone from its earlier flush of triumph to a pale shade that suggested genuine shock. "You wanted to upgrade," I said, looking directly at him. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the silence. "But you forgot that intelligence is not measured by age or appearance. It is measured by strategy." I placed the papers in his hands with the same casual cruelty he had shown me minutes earlier. "These are from Catherine Ross, my attorney," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You will recognize some of the language, because it is the same language from those divorce papers you just gave me. Except in my version, you do not get the house you tried to transfer into your name alone using forged documents. You do not get the investment accounts you attempted to hide. You do not get anything beyond exactly 50% of our legitimately shared assets, and you will be returning every cent you stole with interest." Catherine stood from her position among the guests, professional and terrifying in equal measure. She commanded attention without raising her voice. "The IRS documents are legitimate," she announced to the room. "I contacted them personally regarding Mr. Whitmore's tax irregularities. They were very interested in the information Mrs. Whitmore provided about unreported income and property valuation fraud." Harrison's mouth opened. No words emerged. He looked like someone drowning, unable to breathe or think or process what was happening to him. Several of his business associates were already pulling out their phones. I could see them typing rapidly, probably calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from someone under federal investigation. Professional relationships built over years were dissolving in real time as people made immediate decisions about association and liability. I turned to Leah, who was still crying silently beside Harrison. "Your employer received an interesting package this afternoon," I said, my voice carrying the same quiet authority. Video evidence of an employee engaging in an affair, using company resources to facilitate that relationship. Company hotels for personal use. Company expense accounts for romantic dinners. Company time for personal appointments. I believe they call that misappropriation of corporate assets. Leia made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Her company had strict policies about ethical conduct. Her career, like Harrison's reputation, was collapsing in that very moment. I looked at the 40 guests, many of whom were now recording the scene on their phones, just as they had recorded what they thought was my humiliation minutes earlier. "Thank you all for witnessing this," I said. "Your presence makes everything documented public and very permanent." I picked up my clutch purse, nodded to Emma and Catherine, who stood immediately to join me. Then I walked out of Meridian Hall with my head high and my dignity intact, leaving behind 40 stunned guests, a weeping mistress, and a husband whose life I had just systematically demolished using nothing more than patience, evidence, and the strategic application of truth. The glass doors of Meridian Hall closed behind us with a soft hydraulic hiss that felt final. The evening air was cool against my face after the climate-controlled interior of the venue, and I realized I was shaking slightly now that the performance was over and adrenaline was draining from my system. Emma linked her arm through mine immediately, her grip firm and grounding. Catherine walked on my other side, already pulling out her phone with the efficient movements of someone who had more work to do despite the late hour. We had left Harrison standing in that room, full of people who were already calculating their distance from him. Left him holding divorce papers that would strip away everything he had tried to steal. Left him with federal investigation documents that transformed this from personal betrayal into potential criminal prosecution. Behind us, through the glass walls of the building, I could see movement inside the venue. Guests were standing now, clustering in small groups. Some were clearly leaving, gathering coats and purses and heading for exits. Others remained, probably discussing what they had just witnessed with a kind of fascinated horror, the kind people reserve for spectacular disasters they are grateful not to be experiencing personally. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever witnessed," Emma said once we reached her car in the parking structure. Her voice shook slightly, and I realized she had been holding tension for hours, playing her role as silent supporter while recording everything on her phone. "Gemma, that was perfect. Everything was absolutely perfect." I leaned against her car and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 months. "I need to not go home tonight. I cannot face that house right now." "You are staying with me," Emma said immediately, "for as long as you need. I already made up the guest room before I left for the party, because I figured you wouldn't want to go back there tonight." Catherine finished whatever she was typing and looked up at both of us. "He will try to contact you," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Probably within the hour. Angry first, demanding to know how you could do this to him. Then pleading, asking you to fix what you just did to his reputation. Do not respond to anything. Not texts, not calls, not emails. All communication goes through me now." "I understand," I said. "I am serious about this, Gemma. Any direct communication with him can be used to suggest you are open to reconciliation or negotiation outside proper legal channels. Let him spiral. Let him panic. Let his attorneys deal with the mess he created while we proceed with documenting and recovering every asset he tried to hide." We drove to Emma's apartment in separate cars. I followed her taillights through streets that felt surreal after what had just happened, like I was moving through a world that had fundamentally changed in the space of 30 minutes. Emma's apartment was in a renovated building downtown, smaller than the house I shared with Harrison, but filled with furniture she had actually selected and art she genuinely liked, rather than pieces chosen for their impression value. She poured wine for both of us while I sat on her couch, trying to process the evening. My phone started buzzing around 9 o'clock. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Notifications from social media platforms I rarely used. Emma's phone was doing the same thing, lighting up repeatedly with alerts. "Gemma!" Emma said slowly, staring at her screen. The video is already online. She turned her phone toward me. Someone had uploaded footage from the anniversary dinner to multiple platforms. The view count was climbing visibly, hundreds, becoming thousands as we watched. How many people were recording? I asked. At least a dozen that I could see, Emma replied. Maybe more. Everyone had their phones out once your video started playing on the venue screens. We watched in real time as the anniversary dinner became viral content. The comment sections filled rapidly with responses that ranged from supportive to celebratory. People were praising what they called my strategic patience, mocking Harrison's arrogance, celebrating what they described as the most satisfying public revenge they had witnessed. Someone had already edited together a shortened version, focusing specifically on Harrison's divorce announcement, followed immediately by my counter-reveal. The editing was professional, set to dramatic orchestral music that heightened the emotional impact. That version was spreading even faster than the raw footage. "This is insane," Emma said, scrolling through comment after comment. "There are hundreds of thousands of views already, maybe more than 1 million at this point." By midnight, the number had reached several million across different platforms. My face was being screenshotted and turned into reaction images. Someone had created a meme using the moment I thanked Harrison for the divorce papers, captioning it with text about strategic planning and patience. That meme was being shared hundreds of thousands of times, becoming shorthand for calculated revenge. I turned off my phone around 1 o'clock in the morning because the constant notifications were overwhelming. Emma did the same after confirming that Catherine had everything she needed and would handle any urgent legal matters that arose overnight. "Try to sleep," Emma said, showing me to her guest room. "Tomorrow is going to be intense, and you need rest." I lay in her guest bed, staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours. Sleep seemed impossible despite exhaustion. My mind kept replaying the evening, analyzing every moment, questioning decisions, even though everything had gone exactly according to plan. Monday morning arrived too quickly. I woke to sunlight coming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting realization that my life had fundamentally changed overnight. Emma was already up making coffee in her kitchen when I emerged from the guest room. "Catherine called," she said, handing me a mug. "She wants to talk to you this morning. Said it's important." I called Catherine back while Emma made breakfast, though neither of us would eat. The attorney answered on the first ring. 3 of Harrison's major investors pulled funding overnight, Catherine said without preamble. They issued statements citing concerns about financial irregularities and declining confidence in leadership. Joel Preston released a public statement distancing himself from Harrison's conduct, both personal and professional. He is trying to save the business by throwing Harrison completely under the bus. That was fast, I said. Self-preservation usually is. 2 property development deals Harrison was negotiating fell through. The clients do not want association with someone under federal investigation. And Leah was terminated from her position effective immediately. That last piece of information hit differently than the rest. Leah had made choices that destroyed her career, but there was something sobering about how quickly professional consequences manifested once personal misconduct became public. Her company released a statement about ethics violations and misuse of corporate resources, Catherine continued. Very brief, very corporate, but clear enough that everyone understands why she was terminated. Her name is now permanently linked to both infidelity and professional misconduct. What about Harrison? Has he tried to contact you? His attorney called 4 times last night and twice already this morning. They want to settle immediately. They are offering terms that are increasingly desperate. Each offer is worse for him than the previous one because they understand his position is deteriorating rapidly. What do you recommend? Reject everything until we have completed comprehensive asset valuation. We need to know exactly what exists and what you are entitled to before we negotiate anything. The longer we wait, the weaker his position becomes. His business is collapsing. His reputation is destroyed. Federal investigators are beginning their inquiry. He has no leverage and every incentive to settle quickly before things get worse. How much worse can they get? That depends on what federal investigators find. If the property valuation fraud is as extensive as Joel's documentation suggests, Harrison could face significant fines and potentially prison time. The tax evasion alone is serious. Combined with the fraud, he is looking at consequences that extend well beyond divorce and business failure. We talked for another 20 minutes about legal strategy and next steps. Catherine had already filed formal responses to Harrison's divorce papers, asserting claims to all marital assets and demanding full financial disclosure. She had contacted forensic accountants to begin comprehensive valuation of everything Harrison owned or controlled. The process would take weeks, possibly months, but Catherine was confident we would recover everything he had tried to hide, plus compensation for his dissipation of marital assets. When I hung up, Emma was reading something on her laptop with an expression that was half shock and half amusement. "News websites are covering this," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Not just gossip sites. Actual news outlets are writing about the viral video. They're calling it a case study in strategic response to betrayal." The article she showed me analyzed the anniversary dinner from multiple angles. The planning required, the evidence gathering, the public nature of both Harrison's announcement and my response. There were quotes from legal experts discussing the implications of documenting and exposing marital misconduct in such a comprehensive way. My phone, which I had turned back on that morning, was filled with missed calls and messages. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize. A few were from acquaintances and distant friends who had apparently seen the video and wanted to express support or shock or curiosity about what had happened. 3 messages were from Harrison. The first was angry, demanding to know how I could destroy him like this. The second was pleading, asking me to call him so we could discuss what happened like reasonable adults. The third was threatening, suggesting I would regret making his personal life public and that his attorneys would ensure I paid for the damage I caused to his reputation. I showed them to Emma, who read through all 3 with increasing disgust. "Do not respond," she said firmly. Catherine was right. Let him spiral. I deleted the messages without replying. Whatever Harrison was experiencing now was consequence, not injustice. He had orchestrated a public humiliation designed to destroy me while elevating himself. The fact that his plan had backfired so completely was a result of his own choices, his own arrogance, his own absolute confidence that I would never discover what he was doing or be capable of responding effectively. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of phone calls and legal consultations, and moments of sitting quietly in Emma's apartment trying to process how completely my life had transformed in less than 24 hours. By evening, the viral video had been viewed tens of millions of times across multiple platforms. My face was recognizable now to strangers who had never met me but felt entitled to opinions about my marriage and my choices and whether public revenge was justified or excessive. I sat on Emma's couch that night with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking and realized that despite everything, despite the viral attention and the legal battles ahead and the complete destruction of the life I had been living, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 18 months. Relief. Relief settled over me that Monday evening in Emma's apartment. But it was complicated relief, the kind that comes with recognition that while one chapter had ended, the aftermath would require navigation through territory I had never experienced before. The divorce proceedings began formally the following week. Catherine filed comprehensive responses to Harrison's papers, asserting claims to every marital asset and demanding full financial disclosure with documentation requirements that would take his attorneys weeks to compile. The process was methodical and exhausting, involving depositions and document production, and endless meetings in Catherine's conference room, reviewing financial statements and property records. Harrison's attorney tried multiple approaches to expedite settlement. Each offer was more desperate than the last. reflecting his client's deteriorating position as business partnerships dissolved and federal investigators expanded their inquiry into his financial practices. Catherine rejected every proposal, insisting we would not negotiate until we had a complete understanding of every asset Harrison owned or controlled. The proceedings took 3 months to finalize. Judge Margaret Chin, a woman in her early 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense adjudication of complex marital disputes, presided over our case with an efficiency that suggested she had seen variations of this story countless times throughout her career. Harrison's attorney attempted to argue that the viral video had created prejudice that made fair proceedings impossible, that public opinion had turned so decisively against his client that objective evaluation of asset division could not occur. Judge Chin shut down that argument with a single sentence that Catherine would later tell me she wished she could frame. Your client damaged his own reputation through systematic fraud and public cruelty. Mrs. Whitmore simply documented the truth. The settlement was everything Catherine had promised and more. The house remained mine through sole ownership, since Harrison's attempt to transfer the title without my knowledge or consent was legally void, making me the legitimate owner of property we had purchased together, but that he had tried to steal. The investment accounts were divided exactly in half based on their actual value rather than the diminished amounts Harrison had claimed existed after hiding substantial portions. Retirement funds were split according to proper legal formula rather than Harrison's preferred version, where he kept everything, and I received minimal compensation for 5 years of marriage. Every cent Harrison had transferred to his personal accounts came back with interest calculated from the date of each fraudulent transaction. The vintage watch collection he had hidden in a storage unit was sold at auction, the proceeds divided and contributing to my settlement in a way that felt particularly satisfying, given how many times he had claimed those watches were sold during periods when he insisted we needed to be careful with spending. Catherine even recovered compensation for money Harrison had spent on Leia. The hotel rooms and romantic dinners and jewelry purchases, all charged to our shared accounts, were classified as dissipation of marital assets. Harrison was required to reimburse me for his affair expenses, effectively making him pay twice for the relationship that had destroyed our marriage. The final settlement amount was substantial enough that I could pay off the remaining mortgage on the house and still have significant savings. Financial security I hadn't experienced in years, while Harrison was systematically stealing from accounts I had helped build. But I didn't keep the house. The building held too many memories of a marriage that had slowly suffocated me. Instead, I sold it and used the proceeds to move into a penthouse apartment in the Arts District downtown, a space that felt like liberation made physical. 8 months after the anniversary dinner, I stood in my new apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Meridian Hall was visible in the distance, glass walls reflecting afternoon sunlight. The venue had become a landmark in my personal geography, the place where I had reclaimed my life and demonstrated that quiet patience could be more devastating than dramatic confrontation. I decorated the space according to my own taste, rather than compromising with someone else's preferences or selecting pieces designed to impress business associates. Art I genuinely liked, rather than art that looked expensive. Furniture that served function and provided comfort, rather than making statements about success and status. My career had transformed in ways I never anticipated. The marketing firm I worked for promoted me to creative director 3 months after the video went viral. My boss explained the decision by noting that someone capable of orchestrating such comprehensive strategic communication clearly possessed valuable professional skills that the company wanted to utilize and retain. The promotion came with a 40% salary increase and creative authority over major client campaigns. For the first time in years, I was earning money that was unambiguously mine, unconnected to Harrison's aspirations or expenditures or his constant criticism that I wasn't ambitious enough or successful enough or simply enough. I adopted a cat named Justice because Emma suggested it and the irony appealed to me. An orange imperious creature entirely uninterested in performing emotional labor for anyone's benefit. He spent his days positioned in patches of sunlight coming through the apartment windows, occasionally deigning to acknowledge my presence when food or attention suited his convenience. Catherine became more than my attorney. She became a friend who understood what it meant to watch a marriage dissolve and choose reconstruction over collapse. She introduced me to a support group that met monthly, women with similar stories about partners who had systematically underestimated them. We shared experiences and strategies, building community based on survival and growth rather than shared victimhood. The group taught me that my story was not unique, though the viral documentation of it had been unusual. Countless women had experienced versions of what I had lived through. The difference was that most handled their divorces privately, without public exposure of the betrayals they had endured. 9 months after the anniversary dinner, Catherine called with news that extended Harrison's consequences far beyond divorce and professional collapse. Joel Preston had contacted federal investigators with additional evidence about financial crimes that reached back years before our marriage and continued throughout it. Harrison had been falsifying property valuations systematically, inflating appraisal amounts to secure loans larger than properties justified, then pocketing the difference between actual value and borrowed amounts. Federal investigators launched a comprehensive examination of Harrison's entire business operation. What they uncovered resulted in criminal charges: 14 counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The scope of his illegal activity was staggering, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in unreported income over 6 years. I was questioned extensively as part of the investigation. Federal agents reviewed every document I had provided Catherine during the divorce, looking for any indication I had known about or benefited from Harrison's crimes. They cleared me quickly once they understood I had been as deceived about his business practices as I had been about his personal conduct. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended several days of testimony, sitting in the public gallery and watching prosecutors present evidence that built an overwhelming case. Harrison's business partner testified about practices he had documented but felt powerless to stop. Forensic accountants explained the systematic nature of the fraud. Loan officers from multiple banks described how they had relied on property valuations that turned out to be significantly inflated. Harrison was convicted on 11 of the 14 counts. At sentencing, Judge William Torres imposed 6 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release and restitution requirements that would likely occupy the remainder of Harrison's professional life. I attended the sentencing hearing because Catherine believed closure required witnessing consequences in their entirety. Harrison stood behind the defense table, wearing a suit that no longer fit properly, his face showing accumulated stress from 18 months of fighting charges that evidence had proven conclusively. When Judge Torres asked if he wanted to make a statement, Harrison looked directly at me for the first time since his arrest. I destroyed everything good in my life because I confused success with happiness and ambition with fulfillment, he said, his voice carrying less confidence than I had ever heard from him. My wife deserved better. She was better, and I was too arrogant to recognize that until it was too late. The words might have meant something years earlier. Now they were just insufficient acknowledgement, delivered far too late to matter. I felt nothing watching him be led away to begin his sentence. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even the closure people talk about finding at the end of difficult chapters. Just a profound sense of release from a narrative I was finally finished living. That evening, I stood in my apartment with Justice curled on the sofa and harbor lights, reflecting off dark water. I understood something fundamental that had taken months to fully grasp. Revenge had never been about destroying Harrison. It was about refusing to be destroyed by him, about documentation rather than confrontation, strategy rather than emotion, patience rather than impulse. Harrison had wanted to upgrade. What he actually did was trade partnership for performance. Someone who knew him completely for someone who knew only the version he performed for public consumption. The real upgrade had been mine. From wife defined by marriage to woman defined by choices. From someone who absorbed criticism about inadequacy to someone who recognized that inadequacy belonged to the person delivering judgment rather than receiving it. The anniversary dinner video still circulates occasionally on social media, resurfacing whenever someone compiles examples of public accountability or strategic response to betrayal. I no longer feel exposed by it. Instead, it has become a permanent reminder that quiet people are not weak people. They are simply waiting for the right moment to demonstrate exactly how dangerous underestimation can be. If this story of calculated justice and strategic revenge kept you captivated from beginning to end, show your support by hitting that like button right now. My favorite moment was when I calmly thanked Harrison for the divorce papers before revealing the comprehensive evidence that would destroy everything he had built. What was your most satisfying moment in this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and triumph over betrayal. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're notified the instant we upload new content.